A live interview with Donald Knight, Chief People Officer from Greenhouse. Recorded live at Unleash America in Las Vegas. Check it out.
Welcome to RecTech, the podcast where recruiting and technology intersect. Each month, you'll hear from vendors shaping the recruiting world, along with recruiters who'll tell you how they use technology to hire talent. Now, here's your host, the mad scientist of online recruiting, Chris Russell.
RecTech Media Travel is sponsored by Pillar. Great teams start with great interviews. Modernize your interview process with AI-powered interview intelligence. Book a demo today at Pillar.hr. Enjoy the audio. All right, I'm here with Donald Knight, Chief People Officer at Greenhouse. He was on the show probably a year or two ago through Zoom, but we're here in person at Unleash. So, Donald, it's good to meet in real life finally, IRL. What's new at Greenhouse?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me. And yeah, this is like you and I meeting is like an M&M's commercial. We can actually say they do exist, right?
Yep.
What's new at Greenhouse? Look, I think everything. I think we're navigating a different workforce dynamic than we've seen before, in the sense that you have technology innovation, and a demand for more AI in the product. Higher than we've ever seen, a demand from customers before. Mm-hmm. And when you juxtapose that against the generational shifts of the types of talent that are both entering and exiting the workforce, it just makes this very ripe conversation for us as leaders to try to figure out, okay, where do we want to place our bets long term on the long-term strategy of the organization, and how do we make sure that we're getting the right deployment at the right pace as it relates to AI into the hands of those that are doing literally a lot of the recruiting and sourcing for these companies. So,
talk about the next generation workforce, because they have different expectations now, right? Coming out of COVID and things like that, in terms of how they view work. How do you see that from your perspective as a people officer and what you're seeing from candidates and stuff?
Yeah, I think the social contract between employees and employers was disrupted with the pandemic. Yep. I think there's an acceleration of what that's going to look like moving forward. That's really going to be driven by Gen Z, right? Like they're going to, by 2030, they make up 40% of the workforce. At the end of next year, if we continue to see the birth rate and the death rate, if you will, of humans, then boomers will finally be less than. There will be less boomers on the planet than Gen Z. Right now, the number one would be millennials at 72 million on the planet, right? So I think for me, us trying to figure out, okay, number one, if you're trying to recruit them, what even appeals to that generation? Yep. And how do you talk about your tech stack? And how do you talk about how they're going to be rewarded? And how do you talk about work-life balance if your company is committed to that? Last but certainly not least, how do you view things like inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship? Because that's a default for them. Like they're growing up with that in their homes and also at schools. I think the thing that's unknown is, what are employers willing to budge? Where are they willing to say, nope, we're willing to reimagine what the workplace and that contract looks like? And I think a good indication of the types of positive tension I think we're going to see could actually be illustrated in the pandemic, right? So you saw all these folks work from home. For the most part, profits didn't suffer, even with people working more remotely or teleworking or hybrid. Yet you still see this wave of all these CEOs and boards saying, no, we want people back in person. I think a lot of that is being driven through fear or concern that they haven't seen those companies be successful over long stretches of time with people not being in the same physical environment, right? So you think about like Elon Musk. He's probably one of the most controversial people in tech right now, or in business. Like, he's built 3 different successful billion-dollar companies. He didn't do that collaboration over Zoom or remotely. Right. So for him, consciously, he can't even imagine what that would look like. Yet you have a generation of workers that are saying, well, that's our default, Elon. So if you want me to come work for you, what does that look like? Yeah. And so I think the burden or the responsibility that we have at Greenhouse is, number one, create a tool and continue to enhance a tool that allows other companies to find talent that match what they're looking for from an employee value proposition perspective. But then also, people like Kelly is going to hold me accountable to make sure that we're living up to that expectation internally as well, right? So,
Excellent. What's a day in the life like for you? Walk me through that, if you could.
you mean beyond the burp claws and the poopy diapers?
Yes, beyond the family affairs there.
Yeah, you know what? I think right now, even with being on parental leave, I'm finding myself sporadically sprinkling back into the business as I start to gear up for my return. And a lot of it right now has really been driven on helping influence the product. So I'm spending a lot of time with our product team, including Henry Tsai, our chief product officer, and then his number 2, Alex Powell.
Is that because you're using the platform as well to help influence it?
I mean, yeah, I would argue, I mean, our engineers may argue differently, but I would argue my team is this, we're the super users, right? Like any of the new features, they build it, but we're the ones that test it, figure out what's working, what's not working, where can we figure out some of the kinks that need to be worked out, because we're customer zero. So I'm spending a lot of time with our product team, particularly as we start to figure out how we're deploying AI. And there's 4 great use cases that we see that we're expediting, which is around content generation, how do we automate certain steps on an automation perspective, how do we use it for like summarization, so when you're thinking about at the end of an interview cycle, what does that look like, how do I capture everybody's thoughts about a particular candidate, and then categorization, so when you're categorizing gold medalists in the interview process versus silver medalists, and then what do we do with that silver medalist data? Do we just keep it? Do we figure out, do we want to then share that with some of the other folks on the Greenhouse platform, because they're probably looking for 80% of the same thing in the same title? So those are the 4 use cases we're using right now. We're not using it for decisioning, but we are testing it on what would need to be the right use cases for us to get comfortable with that. I think that's further out, but to be part of the experimentation side of the house, I think is pretty interesting. And then I think the other one is just really around these shifts in what candidates are expecting. Like, you think about our candidate reports and what people are looking for and what they're expecting from an employer when they navigate the interview process, when they're talking about salaries now, based on pay transparency, when they're talking about total rewards and benefits, given some of the shifts in laws, things like reproductive rights. Like, how do we help them navigate that employer brand and still live up to that, those values that are on the proverbial wall? So navigating that, I think, has been probably the 2 biggest things I've spent most of my time on.
Interesting. What's the biggest pitch today? You sell Greenhouse to a potential candidate. Can you describe that?
Yeah, well, when I'm pitching to an employer as opposed to a candidate, it's slightly different. When I'm pitching to a candidate, I tell them, look, if you want to find a company who cares about technology and innovation, but doesn't want to forfeit having amazing innovation, amazing technology at your fingertips, meaning they don't want to sacrifice that because they also prioritize things like diversity, equity, inclusion. Typically, if you find a Greenhouse customer, they're going to be able to walk that fine line very well. Number one, if they're using Greenhouse, we're not the low-cost provider in the market. And so there is a value-based approach that we have to our technology, and as a result, you get way more bells and whistles than many of our competitors. At the same time, the reason why we even built the company in the first place is because we believe in structured interviewing and how do you democratize access to phenomenal tech jobs to the broader, community and the broader industry as it relates to the workforce. So if you find a company that uses Greenhouse, those 2 things probably are going to be true, or they wouldn't be using us. Right. That's how I pitch the candidate. If I'm pitching the employer, well, for me, this is around differentiation. Like, how do you want to make sure that you're finding high performers and top talent in the market? And if you care about doing that and making sure that you advertise to the full fabric of the community, you're probably going to want to structure interview process because you want to be able to determine, okay, Donald and Kelly had different upbringings and different backgrounds and went to different schools, or maybe I went to coding school and she went to a 4-year university. Great, but how do you uncover the value that we're able to then bring to Greenhouse? And if you have asked the right questions, you'll be able to figure out, this woman run circles and cartwheels around people as it relates to media and making sure you connect with people as it relates to Greenhouse's brand and what we're doing and how do we tell that story in the market. That level of storytelling is something that was exhibited in her interview process. Same thing with me when it came to what do I care about when we're prioritizing the wellness or the livelihood of our employees. That a lot of that was disclosed in my interview process, on my thought process, what's my default thinking on that.
Yep.
And so if you care about those things as an employer, well, you want a tool that's going to be able to help unearth that. That's typically where Greenhouse steps in.
Nice. How many employees now at Greenhouse?
As of this morning, 692.
692.
Does that make me a nerd?
It's a real-time number there?
That makes me a nerd, yeah, man.
What would you say what's their mood right now in terms of, first of all, are you back in the office? Are you hybrid? What's the status there?
So we took the company completely distributed at the end of 2022. We have one physical office that has a shingle outside. That would be our New York office at One Penn. But then what we did was we created an opportunity for every employee to have access to a physical space if they need it. So through our partnerships with WeWork, with Industrious, with another company called Gable, which is like the Kayak or Expedia of co-working spaces, anybody can go into a physical space if they want to, literally every day. People choose not to, and some people choose to do so. Mm-hmm. But they won't see the Greenhouse shingle. They'll just have a dedicated workspace.
What's your biggest challenge right now, would you say, as a company?
What is our biggest challenge? I think if you come to work for Greenhouse, you're purpose-driven, right? There's likely another organization that was courting you at the same time. And I say purpose-driven because we recognize the social impact we're having. I think the tension or the challenge we have right now is looking outside of the proverbial greenhouse and seeing a lot of the brands and companies we care a lot about not hire at the same volume that we might have seen in like 2022. That's the hardest part because now your value proposition to them, it looks a little bit differently. Right now, most of those companies, they might have impacted their TA team. So some of the value may be us sharing with them other people that we see, other candidates we see in the market. With other people, it's trying to figure out, okay, how do you make sure they have a seamless implementation process because they're using this down period of hiring to migrate from one of our competitors to us so they're prepared when they ramp back up their hiring needs. And like that's a different level of conversation when you're able to devote more time, more bandwidth, more capacity to that customer. And so I think that's the tension is like we have all these people who want to go create all this amazing impact. And right now, I feel they may be struggling with the fact that, hey, I have this much potential and I'm not able to maximize it every day the way that I was accustomed to doing 12 months, 18 months ago. Yep. That's probably the hardest part.
Yep, gotcha.
Yeah.
Are you guys hiring right now at all? Any roles open?
Are we hiring? Absolutely, man.
Here's your chance to
Dude,
tell
well,
us.
It's funny. We just had our hiring prioritization call earlier today with a young lady named Ariana and another young lady named Sia. And so, yeah, we have about 20 roles that are open right now at Greenhouse. So, and that's across a myriad.
Sales, tech, customer care.
A lot of it falls on the go-to-market side. So if you're listening to this and you're interested in pro-serve and customer success, or if you're interested in being on our revenue team, sales team, or our marketing team, tons of opportunities there right now. Where you won't see a large majority of opportunity is on the G&A side of the house. So not a lot in legal, not a lot on the people team. Although I do have 2 roles right now. If people are looking to join, we had some phenomenal folks grow outside of the greenhouse and become alumni. And so I got 2 folks on the 2 opportunities on the people team we're sourcing for.
Nice. Donald, appreciate the catch up. Great to see you.
Yeah, man. Good to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
All right. Perfect.
Looking for your next HR technology role? Go to your browser, type in hrtechjob.com, and browse hundreds of jobs with the best HR technology vendors. HR tech professionals finally have a dedicated job marketplace to find work or be found. Sign up for job alerts or post a resume. Discover jobs with companies like Workday, Phenom, HiBob, Deal, and more. You'll even find HR tech roles with employers in case you want to work with managing HCM or HRIS platforms. HR Tech Job, the only job market for HR technology careers. Join us at hrtechjob.com.
Another episode of RecTech is in the books. Follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Russell or visit rectechmedia.com, where you can find the audio and links for this show on our blog. RecTech Media helps keep employers and recruiters up to date through our podcasts, webinars, and articles. So be sure to check out our other sites, recruiting headlines, and HR podcasters to stay on top of recruiting industry trends. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon on the next episode of RecTech, the Recruiting Technology Podcast.